Pam Bondi entered the chamber that day with one purpose: to expose the corruption that Washington's elite believed they had buried. They had miscalculated her. They assumed she would follow their rules. But then, everything shifted in a way no one anticipated. Now, imagine this. The Grand Chamber of Congress was alive with energy. The cameras were focused, the lights shone brightly, and every seat was occupied by lawmakers, journalists, and staffers eager for a dramatic showdown. At the center of it all stood Pam Bondi, the newly appointed U.S. Attorney General, a woman recognized for her razor-sharp legal expertise and relentless dedication to justice. Opposite her, Schiff sat composed, radiating an air of smug confidence. He believed he was about to win yet another political clash. But this day felt different. There was a tension in the room, an unspoken understanding among the crowd that this wasn't just another hearing, it was a reckoning. Pam Bondi took a calm step toward the microphone, adjusted her notes, and locked eyes with Schiff. She could see the slight twitch in his jaw, the way he clenched the table's edge just a bit too tightly. Schiff was ready for a debate, but he wasn't ready for her. She was about to take apart his carefully constructed narrative, piece by piece, and he knew it. "Honorable Senators," she began, her voice steady and unwavering, "let's correct a few things." Her words cut through the chamber like a scalpel. There was no showmanship, no dramatics, just cold, hard precision. The entire chamber leaned in, as if pulled by the gravity of the moment. Bondi didn't waste a second. She went straight to the point. Mr. Duffy didn't come from a state-level position. Mr. Duffy came from serving as Deputy Chief of Staff at the Department of Defense before transitioning to the Office of Management and Budget. That's a significant distinction. Her gaze flicked to Schiff, whose usual confidence seemed to falter, if only for an instant. Bondi wasn't just clarifying facts. She was exposing his deliberate distortions, omissions, and half-truths. And this was just the beginning. The House managers have spent all day claiming that the White House is hiding evidence, that we're trying to bury the truth. But let's talk about what they've done, she continued. She paused, letting the words settle in the room. They initiated their proceedings in a closed-off bunker, without the president, without his legal counsel. They denied Ranking Member Nunes the ability to call witnesses. They denied Ranking Member Collins the same rights. And they call this fairness? They call this justice? A murmur swept through the audience. Schiff shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. Bondi had not only flipped the narrative, she had done so with the precision of a prosecutor dismantling a witness. This was the moment everyone understood the game had changed. Schiff had come in expecting to dominate the conversation. Instead, he found himself on trial. And Bondi wasn't finished yet. Schiff shifted again, his fingers drumming anxiously on the table before him. The confidence he had carried into the hearing was beginning to crack, and Bondi saw it. She had penetrated the defenses of one of Washington's most seasoned strategists. Now, she was prepared to strike even deeper. The chamber, once buzzing with quiet whispers, had descended into an uneasy silence. The House managers have spent the entire day claiming that the White House is hiding evidence, Bondi continued, her voice measured and unwavering. They claim we're trying to bury the truth. But let's focus on what they've done. She leaned forward slightly, allowing her words to settle heavily in the room. Across the chamber, senators exchanged glances, recognizing where she was headed. The secret hearings, selective leaks, and exclusion of witnesses who could have countered their narrative, Bondi was about to expose all of it. They started this process in secret, behind closed doors, without allowing the president or his legal counsel to participate, she stated, her voice sharp and deliberate. They denied Ranking Member Nunes the right to call witnesses. They denied Ranking Member Collins the same. They held hearings where only their version of events was presented. The murmurs in the audience grew louder. Schiff's usual composure, carefully maintained for the cameras, began to erode. Bondi wasn't just arguing, she was methodically building a case, piece by piece, exposing a pattern of deception that couldn't be ignored. Turning her attention directly to Schiff, she addressed him with piercing clarity. "You call this fairness? You call this justice?" The room went still. Schiff swallowed hard, his lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't respond, but he didn't need to. The silence in the chamber said it all. The American people were told this impeachment process was about truth, about transparency, Bondi stated. But it's clear now, it was never about that. This is about power, about control, about orchestrating a way to remove a sitting president by any means necessary. She paused, her gaze fixed on Schiff. And you, she continued, her voice cutting through the air like steel, you weren't seeking justice. You were constructing corruption. A man who stacked the deck and pretended it was a fair game. Straightening her posture, Bondi maintained her unreadable expression. The House took no action on the subpoenas issued to Mr. Duffy and Mr. Blair. What? Because they didn't want a court to tell them they were trampling on constitutional rights. They didn't want a ruling that exposed this entire process for what it's been from the very beginning, a sham. The word hung in the air like a live wire. Schiff's jaw clenched, his grip tightening around his pen. He had come into the hearing expecting to control the narrative, but Pam Bondi had rewritten the story entirely. Certainly. Here's the rewritten script word by word. The word hung in the air like a live wire. Schiff's jaw tensed, his grip tightening around his pen. He had walked into this hearing expecting to set the terms of engagement, but Pam Bondi had just rewritten the rules, and she wasn't done yet. Schiff inhaled sharply, forcing himself to maintain his composure, but Pam Bondi had him cornered. She could see it in his posture, the way his shoulders stiffened, the way he clutched his pen a little too tightly. He had spent years controlling narratives, bending facts to fit his agenda, but now, under the piercing scrutiny of Bondi, his house of cards was beginning to tremble. And she was just getting started. Let's shift the focus for a moment, Bondi said, her tone deceptively calm. The House managers claimed they were pursuing justice, that this process was about accountability. But let's talk about who they refused to hold accountable. She let the words hang for a moment, scanning the room, letting the weight of the moment build. Schiff knew exactly where this was going, and for the first time that evening, he truly looked uncomfortable. Joe Biden, Bondi said, enunciating each syllable with the precision of a prosecutor delivering a damning indictment. The man they claim is untouchable. The man whose name, when spoken in this chamber, suddenly makes due process and oversight disappear. A few murmurs rippled through the audience, some leaning in, others shifting in their seats. They had heard the whispers, seen the reports, but no one had dared to say it outright in this setting. Until now. Did the House managers ask Joe Biden a single question about his involvement in his son's lucrative business? She glanced down at her notes, though she already knew the words by heart. I never spoke to my son about his overseas business dealings, she recited, shaking her head, then looked up, her expression unreadable. Except that wasn't true, was it? She let the question linger, then delivered the killing blow. Because Hunter Biden told the New Yorker that he did speak to his father about Burisma, she said, each word cutting through the silence like a knife. He said, and I quote, Dad said, I hope you know what you're doing. The weight of the contradiction settled over the room like a thick fog. Schiff's face was unreadable now, but Bondi could see the wheels turning in his mind, searching for an exit that didn't exist. This was never about justice, Bondi continued, her voice unwavering. Because if it were, Joe Biden and Hunter Biden would have been questioned. Their stories would have been scrutinized. Instead, the House managers shielded them, refused to even consider their involvement, all while claiming they were pursuing the truth. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. You want to talk about conflicts of interest? You want to talk about corruption? She gestured around the room. It's right in front of us. And yet, somehow, we're not allowed to ask the questions that matter most. Schiff had finally stopped tapping his pen. His face had darkened slightly, but he remained silent. He knew that anything he said now would only make things worse. Bondi's voice softened, but the intensity remained. What's more dangerous to democracy? Holding the powerful accountable, or pretending corruption doesn't exist when it benefits your side? The room was silent. Schiff refused to meet her gaze, but Bondi wasn't done yet. Not even close. Bondi paused, letting the silence settle over the chamber like a heavy fog. She had exposed the lie, laid bare the hypocrisy, and now the weight of the truth was pressing down on everyone in the room. But this wasn't just about contradiction. This was about evidence, cold, hard, irrefutable evidence that the very people screaming about corruption had been covering up their own crimes all along. She took a step forward, her eyes sweeping across the chamber. You see, senators, this isn't just speculation. It's not a smear campaign. It's not some baseless conspiracy. She turned back to Schiff, her voice razor-sharp. We don't need to rely on speculation because Joe Biden told us exactly what he did, in his own words, on camera. A flicker of tension crossed Schiff's face, but he quickly masked it. He knew what was coming. Everyone did. A large screen behind Bondi flickered to life, and suddenly, there he was, Joe Biden, standing on a stage, bragging about the very thing the media said never happened. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. Biden's voice echoed through the chamber, the recording playing in crystal clear quality. I looked at them and said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a gun. He got fired. The words landed like a bombshell. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Some senators exchanged stunned glances, while others shifted uncomfortably. Schiff remained rigid, his lips pressed into a thin line. Bondi let the clip play for a moment longer, then turned back to face the room. That was Joe Biden, she said evenly, bragging about leveraging $1 billion in U.S. taxpayer money to get a Ukrainian prosecutor fired, the same prosecutor who just so happened to be investigating Burisma, the company paying his son $83,000 a month. She let the facts speak for themselves. No spin. No media filter. Just the truth, straight from Biden's own mouth. But I thought there was no conflict of interest, she continued, her tone dripping with incredulity. I thought there was no wrongdoing. I thought we were supposed to believe that Joe Biden, out of the kindness of his heart, was just ensuring Ukraine had the right prosecutor in place. The tension in the room was palpable now. Some of the Democratic senators looked uneasy. They knew this wasn't a good look, no matter how much the media tried to bury it. Schiff finally spoke, his voice carefully measured. That's taken out of context. Bondi didn't even flinch. She had been waiting for this weak rebuttal. Oh, context, she shot back, arching an eyebrow. What context would make it acceptable for a sitting vice president to withhold U.S. aid in exchange for the firing of a prosecutor investigating his son's employer? Please enlighten us. Schiff's mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. What could he say? The evidence was right there, undeniable, unspinnable. Bondi pressed forward. Let me remind you what the House managers said when they started this impeachment. They said the President of the United States should be removed from office for allegedly conditioning aid to Ukraine on an investigation. But what did Joe Biden do? She gestured toward the screen. He did exactly that. And not only did he do it, he was proud of it. Pam Bondi adjusted the microphone, her posture straight and unyielding. The room fell silent, and Adam Schiff avoided her gaze. Senators, journalists, and staffers alike sensed it. Something had changed. The narrative had crumbled, and the air was heavy with anticipation. The American people had just witnessed a reckoning. Pam Bondi let her eyes sweep across the chamber before turning toward the cameras. Her voice was steady, each word deliberate. What you saw here today wasn't just about one man or one party, she began, her tone resolute. It was about the truth they've tried to bury, the truth they've tried to silence. She paused, letting the gravity of her words settle over the room. But here's the thing about the truth, it doesn't need their approval. It doesn't bend to their corruption. It doesn't disappear just because the media refuses to report it. Bondi's gaze sharpened, shifting to the journalists seated in the back of the room. They thought they could manipulate you. They thought they could gaslight you into believing that justice only applies when it benefits them, that the rules only matter when they're being used against their enemies. She stepped forward slightly, her voice growing in strength. But the American people aren't blind. They see what's happening. They've watched as this country's institutions, the media, big tech, even the intelligence agencies, have been weaponized to control not just what they see, but what they're allowed to say. A murmur rippled through the chamber, But Bondi pressed on, her tone unwavering. For years, they've told you that questioning authority makes you an extremist, that demanding accountability makes you a threat to democracy. But let me tell you something, the real threat to democracy isn't the people demanding answers. It's the ones trying to silence them. She turned her attention back to Schiff, her expression unreadable but unrelenting. And you, Mr. Schiff, she said, her tone laced with precision, are one of the worst offenders. The room tensed. Schiff's jaw tightened, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. But he didn't speak. Bondi continued, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. You've spent years parading yourself as a defender of democracy. You claimed to stand against corruption. But all the while, you turned a blind eye when it was your own party orchestrating the schemes. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze locking onto Schiff. You smeared President Trump for daring to ask questions about Biden's ties to Ukraine. But you knew the truth all along, didn't you? Schiff blinked but remained silent. Bondi gave a small, knowing smile. Oh, you did. You just didn't expect anyone to have the courage to say it out loud. She turned back to the senators, her voice growing sharper. And let's be clear, this isn't just about Adam Schiff. It's about an entire system that protects its own. A system that sees public office not as a duty, but as a business. A business where power is traded like currency and loyalty is bought with backroom deals. Her gaze swept across the room, landing on each senator in turn. This is about who holds the power in this country and who they answer to. For years, Washington insiders have manipulated the American people, telling them what to believe, what to think, and who to trust. Her voice softened, but the intensity remained. But here's what they don't understand. The American people aren't afraid anymore. They've seen too much. They've heard too much. And no amount of censorship, no amount of media spin, will make them forget the truth. She turned back to the cameras, her voice steady and deliberate. This fight isn't over, she said. They will try again. They will lie, they will censor, and they will do everything in their power to make you believe that your voice doesn't matter. But let me tell you this, your voice does matter. This country belongs to you. Her final words hung in the air, heavy with conviction. So stand up. Speak out. Don't back down. Because together, we can take back what is ours. Together, we can ensure that the truth prevails. She stepped back from the microphone, her expression unreadable but resolute. The room was silent, the weight of her words pressing down on everyone present. Schiff sat motionless, his carefully constructed narrative shattered. Pam Bondi had done more than dismantle his argument. She had exposed the very system he represented. And the American people were watching. She shook her head slightly. But you're smarter than that. You see what's happening. You've seen the lies. You've seen the double standard. And now, the choice is in your hands. She paused, her expression resolute. This is your country, not theirs. Not the politicians who have spent decades selling it out. Not the media who tell you what you're allowed to think. Not the tech giants who decide who can and cannot speak. Her voice rose, her conviction cutting through the air. America belongs to you, and it's time to take it back. A murmur spread through the room. Schiff still hadn't spoken. He wouldn't, because he had lost. Bondi straightened her papers, then stepped back from the podium. To every American watching, she said, her voice now carrying the weight of finality, they want you to feel powerless. They want you to believe that you don't have a say, that Washington will always be controlled by the same corrupt politicians, that nothing will ever change. She took a breath. But they're wrong. She let her gaze linger on the camera. On November 8th, you get to decide. You get to send them a message they can't ignore, that this country is not for sale, that the truth still matters, and that the American people will not be silenced. She let those words hang for a moment, then delivered her final call to action. If you believe in truth, if you believe in justice, if you believe that America is worth fighting for, stand up, speak out, and vote. She turned, walking away from the podium, the chamber still thick with the weight of everything she had just exposed. And that proved one thing. Sometimes the best way to defeat corruption is to drag it into the light. If you believe in fighting for truth, she concluded, make sure to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe. Because this isn't just a story, it's a battle. And it's one we intend to win.